Welcome to today's session. The theme for today is time management and boundaries. And this is part of a 4-part series. So part 4, my name is Emma Anderson. If you don't already know me, I use the pronouns she and her, and I am the Director of Inclusive Education and Teaching Support for CICS. So I am here to help you develop some human skills while you're maybe not taking classes. And so we've covered a lot of territory in these winter sessions, but one of the things I get asked about a lot, or that people seem to express concerns about, are time management and productivity. So I wanted to talk about not just time management, but also boundaries, because I think often that's an area where we can have trouble, especially in difficult power dynamics like being in graduate school. So here we go. So the slide I had up earlier, just to think about like what's a strength for you and what's a struggle, I think is illuminating a little bit, because it sort of helps you identify like what feels easy, or what feels like, oh, I can just like do this and it's not a big deal, and what feels like, oh my gosh, it's so hard. So if it feels really hard to, for example, make time for eating and sleeping and exercise, that's like something to think about for your own boundaries and values and that kind of thing. If you're having a really hard time making progress on your research, maybe your research topic isn't working out super well for you, or maybe there's some other problem. If coursework is super easy and doing your assistantship is really hard, that gives you more information too. So just wanted you to have that as a framework as we begin this conversation. So first of all, I kind of want to like bust this productivity myth. Sometimes when I talk to people about time management and kind of like spending time wisely, people get stuck in a little bit of this, like, how can I use as much time as possible to get as much done as possible all the time? And I want to tell you right now that that is not my jam. I do not think that that is actually going to help you out. Shaming and pushing ourselves to do more all the time is actually counterproductive. We will do better in all facets of life if we are sleeping enough, if we're eating enough, if we are taking care of our brains and our bodies. All those things are super, super important. And the average person, I don't have a great citation for this. I read it and I was looking for the citation this morning and couldn't find a good one. If I find it, I'll shoot it to you. But the average person has 3 to 4 highly productive hours in them every day. That's not 8 hours. That's not 12 hours. That's not get up at 7 and start working and don't stop working until 9 p.m. That is not the way we are wired. Maybe people tell us we're supposed to do that, but it's just not the way it works. So we got to make peace with that. So I just want to like preface whatever I say about time management with that. So how do we understand ourselves and our needs so that we can actually make the most of the time we have and the energy we have? And if we structure it that way, it's a little kinder to ourselves, and it kind of works with us rather than working against us. So here are some ideas you might want to try that may or may not work for you. Time management is not an all one-size-fits-all situation. Depending on how your brain works, what cultural expectations you have, your needs for sleep and eating and downtime and all of that, these may or may not work for you. But there are 4 ideas I want to tell you about: setting small goals, writing a schedule, finding ways to be accountable, and the Pomodoro Technique, which is a very specific technique for how we work with time. So when I say set small goals, I mean tiny goals. I sometimes ask graduate students to set goals and they're like, okay, I'm going to do all my homework for both of my classes in the next 3 days. And it's like, okay, like maybe you have to do that. Maybe that's like when they're due, and you know, it's good to know that. But those big chunk goals can be super overwhelming. And that's where we can start procrastinating and ending up not sleeping because we have to finish everything right away. And I used algorithms homework as an example because algorithms are the kind of thing that has to sit in your brain for a long time. You can't write a proof just like, boom. You can't, bang your head against it and just make it happen. So when you have your first goal idea, I encourage you to shrink it until it becomes trivial. So in my example, going from completing all your homework to homework for one class, to one problem on the homework, to I'm going to start the first problem on my homework in the next 2 hours, which seems trivial to me. I can start it. Of course I can start it. I'll read it. Maybe I'll write the given statement for my proof. If it feels trivial, it'll help us start. I know it can feel scary to set small goals because you realize that the actual outcome has to be much bigger, but it does tend to help us get into the mindset of, yes, I can do this, rather than having a giant goal seem insurmountable. So as much as you can break down those to-do list tasks into teensy tiny pieces, and the harder the task seems, the smaller the pieces should be. Writing a schedule, I think, is really helpful for a lot of people. But I think a lot of times people write schedules that are aspirational. So for example, if you normally wake up at 10 and you tell yourself, well, I need to wake up at 7, I think that that's a recipe for failure. Instead, what I encourage you to do is write down what you actually do without blaming yourself for it. So if you actually wake up at 10 every day, say, this is when I get up. If you actually like to take an hour to eat breakfast, but you feel like you shouldn't, or you feel guilty about it, tell yourself that actually you take an hour to eat breakfast every day. It's important to you. That's what you do. Are you on your phone for a half an hour before you get out of bed? Hello. That's one I've tried to tell myself not to do for a long time. And it's easier if I know that I'm just going to do it. And if I build it into my day. We have to accept where we are in order to find small ways to change. If we say we're going to make this big radical change and be a totally new person, it normally does not work out. So instead, how can we be kind to ourselves, accept ourselves as we are, and then find the small ways to change? Can you get up at 9:30 instead of 10? Can you read an article over breakfast if you feel like you really need that time? Though I actually think that taking time to just eat is really like a beautiful gift to yourself, and I encourage you to try doing that if you can at all. I'm really bad at it. So, I'm right there with you if that's hard for you. Accountability. Sometimes it's easier to get tasks done when we know that somebody else knows that we're supposed to get a task done. So Alex suggested a couple times ago, the virtual coffee shop for graduate students. If you don't know about this, it is awesome. You can sign up at this link, and they'll invite you to Zoom meetings where you can just sit with other grad students and work on writing, work on homework, work on research, whatever it is that you need to do. And I think they do some like exercises sometimes so that you're all doing stuff together. But that's a really great way to meet other graduate students. Or you can use a buddy in or outside of academia. Just reach out to someone and say, hey, I really need to get this done by Friday. Can I text you about it and tell you when I'm getting the small steps done? Or find a way to reward yourself. I've told you before about this app called Habitica that I really like. It sort of gamifies your life. And for some reason, like collecting fake gold coins on an app like works for me to make sure that I put on a clean shirt every day. And like for some people, it really works. Other people, it doesn't. But sometimes reward or small rewards, like I get to watch a YouTube video once I do this thing. Those kinds of things can help us keep accountability to ourselves. And then the Pomodoro Technique. Some people really, really love this technique. This is a way to get yourself to start working on a task and to do sustained effort on a task while taking some breaks. So the rule is that you pick a task to work on, one task, and you can do any work related to the task, but you cannot stop or be distracted for 25 minutes, and you set a timer. When the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break and you can do anything you want, except the work. You actually have to take that break. You do that 4 times, so that's a total of 2 hours, and then you take a much longer break, half an hour or an hour or something. And that can push you through to get some work done that might be difficult to start. I think sometimes that idea that you can do any work related to the task, but that it has to be on that one task, can be a helpful sort of box to put your mind in. So those are things that I encourage you to think about with time management. But a lot of times, the thing that comes along with time management is boundaries. So boundaries are lines that mark the limits of an area, or the division between what is yours and what is someone else's. And as I talk about boundaries, I'm going to use this book a lot, which I highly recommend if boundaries are difficult for you, or if you are a conflict averse person. This book is written particularly for you. F Your Boundaries by Faith Harper. It's pretty short, easy read. And she says that boundaries are our rules of engagement and our everyday expressions of consent. So we talk about consent a lot when we talk about sex and when we talk about like physical boundaries, but it actually factors into lots of things that we do. So there's physical boundaries, like you can touch me or you cannot touch me in these ways. Property boundaries, like what someone's allowed to borrow, what's yours, what someone else's, like when my roommate borrowed my thermos without asking and never washed it for 2 weeks, like that's a boundary violation, that kind of thing. Emotional boundaries, which is both how we interact with emotions with other people and how we express emotion and how we allow others to express emotion. Intellectual boundaries, the way that we allow other people to interact with our intellect. For example, an intellectual boundary could be, I refuse to work with anyone who belittles my ideas, which can be a boundary that might not work for you in academia, but it's a boundary you could have. And then time boundaries, of course, like what I will do when and what I will not do when, how much time I will spend on different things. So along with all of these types of boundaries, I think it's really important for us to consider styles of boundaries. So Dr. Harper says there are 3 styles of boundaries. There are rigid boundaries that will not be bent under any circumstance. So if you say, I refuse to work with someone who belittles my ideas, you're in a meeting with an advisor, they say that idea is crap, and you walk out the door and you are not coming back. Like that kind of like hard line. Some of them are super useful, like no one's ever allowed to punch me in the face. Like, I think that's pretty useful. But some rigid boundaries are not super useful because a lot of times what compromise is acceptable for us. Flexible boundaries are did you lose me for a minute? Okay. I'll just start with flexible boundaries. I think I was just blathering. A flexible boundary is a strong guideline that can be bent under special circumstances. So like, I know I don't want to answer the phone after 9 p.m., but if I know that something like an emergency is going on, I'm happy to do that. Or I don't answer my email on the weekends, except that I know I have a deadline on Sunday. And so this weekend, I will answer my email. Those kinds of flexible things that allow for compromise. And then permeable boundaries are the ones where we just let anybody do whatever they want. So I don't really want to answer my phone after 9 p.m., but I do it anyway. And then I have a long conversation. I let someone rant to me. That's breaking an emotional boundary. Like I'm letting everything in and not communicating what I really need. So a lot of times when people realize they have issues with boundaries is because they have a lot of permeable boundaries. And what we're aiming for is mostly flexible boundaries. Some rigid, some permeable. It's all useful for us, but if we're mostly falling in this area where we kind of let people do whatever they want to us, then we may feel resentful or we may feel like we don't have agency. And then always with boundaries, we just want to mention that like boundaries are broken, and a lot of times that's where the difficulty arises. Sometimes other people break our boundaries. Like, I didn't want you to touch me and you touched me. So how do I communicate that in a way that is very clear? Sometimes we break other people's boundaries. A big one can be your sibling says, I really don't want you to meddle in my life or tell our parents about this thing that's going on. And you're like, well, it's much better for you if I just go ahead and tell them. That's also breaking boundaries. How do we hold ourselves accountable? Not just saying, oh, that I knew what was right for you, but accepting that that's a boundary violation. And then sometimes we break our own boundaries. We know we don't want to pick up the phone after 9 p.m. and we do it anyway. We know we really need to go to bed before midnight and we stay up on our phones until 2 a.m. So how can we be strong for ourselves, knowing that we need to be our own self-advocate? So that's all like stuff that I want you to think about in terms of time and boundaries. And I have one more thing I want to just talk about briefly, which is boundaries and communication. And this is particularly geared towards working with a research advisor. I see mostly there are PhD students here, so this will be useful for you. But even if you don't have a PhD research advisor, this could be somebody you work with in a job or anything like that. So I want to talk about communication with assertiveness. So we think of 3 types of communication: passive, which is just based around what other people want, like, oh, you can have whatever you want, I don't have any needs, you pick the restaurant, etc. Aggressive communication is just about what you want. I want to go to Bueno y Sano and I don't care what you want. We're just going to do that because that's what I need. And then assertive communication is kind of in between the two, recognizing that there's something that you want and there's something the other person wants, and we're going to give worth to both of those things, which involves being clear about your perspectives, your goals, and your boundaries while recognizing that the other person is a human being. So using I statements and strong verbs. For example, I chose to spend my time on this particular part of the research question because I thought it was most important, instead of, well, I guess I thought that this would be easier, question mark. Just know what you did, own what you did. Whenever possible, send agenda items ahead of time by email when you're meeting with your advisor, so that you can sort of drive the ship a little bit. When we meet tomorrow, I want to make sure we talk about this part of the project, which is especially important if you're having trouble getting through some particular thing. Take the time to set goals for yourself. And this time, I don't mean the tiny ones. I mean really broad goals, and state them aloud when it's relevant. For example, one of my career goals is to work in a teaching intensive university. So I want to take the opportunity to TA this semester. That doesn't mean that you're saying, this is my rigid boundary, I will only stay in the program if I TA this semester. But you're stating your goal, which is going to help drive a conversation about what is best for everybody. And be comfortable saying no while finding where you can say yes. So I have a paper deadline and cannot get that work to you by noon, but I can get it to you tomorrow by 9 a.m. Often this is the most fruitful way to communicate. We need to be able to say no and have boundaries about our time. this paper is so important to me. I have to spend all my time on that right now. And this is also important. So this is what I can offer you instead. And that gives us that conversation of compromise, which holds your boundary while also recognize the other person needs something as well. Oh, right. There's one more point on this slide. Sorry. Which is just to understand that people might disagree and you need to find that compromise. And that's where those flexible boundaries come in. And again, sometimes your boundaries will be rigid, and that's okay. But it's for you to determine what should be a rigid boundary that you will not let anyone cross, and what will be something you can compromise on. Academia is a lot about compromise. And we want you to be comfortable compromising, but we also don't want you to compromise on your needs or your goals. You're here for a reason, right? Okay, I just talked for a really long time, and now I am done talking, but